At last place is the final season, which isn't much of a surprise to anyone. But to talk about positives first, this probably has the most impressive production value I probably have seen in a TV show, if not one of the most. Um, the production value team, you can tell they worked really hard on this season, and it shows, especially with the Battle of Winterfell, which in terms of production standpoint was just jaw dropping and something we have never seen in TV up till that point. Again, from a production standpoint, the music this season was probably at its best, and there was a few moments that I liked. For example, obviously Jamie Ned and Brienne, which is one of the most heartwarming and one of my favorite scenes in the whole series. But this is season 8, so positives are going to be cut short. Obviously, this season was rushed. It had way too many plot points in such a small amount of such a small amount of runtime. The plot points were just bad. If the majority of plot points of season 8 are how the books are gonna go, honestly, I'm not too excited about that. I'm in the second book, by the way. But yeah, so you've rushed through terrible plot points with absolutely terrible writing and just really bad dialogue. Characters and plot points that have been building for 7 seasons just betrayed. For example, Daenerys's arc was so rushed and bad. Like when she burns King's Landing, it felt hollow and empty. Like it didn't feel earned. Jamie going back to Cersei, just completely destroying seasons of a redemption arc. Cersei, probably one of the most complex, great characters of the show, a great villain, does nothing this season. The Night King, just again, 8 seasons worth of build up for nothing in what resulted to be probably one of the most disappointing plot points in I've ever seen. Jon Snow reduced to nothing but a side character with basically 2 lines of dialogue. The romance between Daenerys and Jon, which was meant to be like the emotional point of this season, in my opinion, completely failed in every way. And of course, this Bran, King Bran the Broken, it was terrible. It abandoned everything that made the show good, the complex storyline, great characters and dialogue, and instead it replaced it with fan service and spectacle and shock value at the expense of the story. There was 4 major storylines: the war against the dead, the war against Cersei, Daenerys' Mad Queen villain arc, and of course the final who gets to be the final ruler of Westeros. 4 major storylines crammed into a few episodes. It's no wonder this season turned out to be the disaster of finale it did. It feels at least minimum 3 seasons at least just crammed into everything. In short, I could talk about hours about my issues with season 8, but in short, it's probably the biggest disappointment in entertainment history, in my opinion, anyways. Season 7 was an overall pretty mediocre-ish, okay-ish season. It was fun and entertaining, and I liked seeing Daenerys and Jon meet for the first time. That was pretty cool to see, even though I think their relationship was pretty terrible. The initial meeting was great. The Spoils of War was a fantastic, one of the best episodes of Game of Thrones. The final battle was one of the best battles in Game of Thrones. Kind of one of the only things about Game of Thrones that was in this season, two opposing sides that you cared about and conflicted. It was great. The acting was great. Jamie's arc, I thought, was fantastic this season. Episode 3, The Queen's Justice, was also a pretty great episode. The ending cliffhanger where the Night King destroys over the undead dragon, that was badass, that was great. And there's some fun and entertaining stuff, but honestly, the writing this season was just a lot poorer. Characters were just flash out to 5 different locations with no consequences, even though it was made such a big deal and shown in the earlier season that travel can bring a big unintended consequence, such as death or something. But no, here people just have fast travel because we need to rush the storyline to the finishing conclusion, and you feel that rushed pacing here. Everything feels it's happening so quick. Daenerys and Jon's romance feels so generic and rushed. Like I just don't buy it. And then there are questionable story decisions. For example, going to the north, risking everything just to get a White Walker for Cersei. That just never made any sense. I think all of this has been talked to death before, so I won't get too much into it. But this season, it feels like fan service and spectacle over the more intricate and complex storytelling that was Game of Thrones of the previous seasons. All of the consequences and everything was thrown out for a much more mainstream and watered down fantasy series, and it feels more like a B-Tech Lord of the Rings than it did Game of Thrones. Although entertaining at times, it just didn't really feel like the Game of Thrones that I knew and loved. Season 5, I mean, probably the most controversial and divisive season of Game of Thrones before season 8 came out. I liked this season when I first watched it, but on a rewatch, I actually liked it a lot more than I did initially. Namely, Jon Snow's storyline this season was GOAT. I mean, seeing him rise the ranks of the Night's Watch was great to see. Hardhome was incredible. It was one of the best episode of Game of Thrones. You know, one of the most incredible episodes I've seen in television. Even people who hated season 5 would be like, "Oh, season 5 of Game of Thrones sucked," but Hardhome was pretty freaking great because it was awesome. No one's denying that. And then you get probably my favorite ending to a season with Jon Snow's betrayal and death, which even though we know it's undone next season, it's still such a sad scene to watch him being betrayed and murdered by his own men. I also love the much more divisive story of Stannis. I mean, love or hate Stannis' story in season 5, it was definitely a lot better than this. And I loved watching his downfall and how he got corrupted by the power and stuff. You know, Shireen's death was one of the more emotionally disturbing scenes of the whole series. The Colosseum battle with Daenerys was awesome to see. The dragon was badass. And also, I want to talk about Roose Bolton, who is an awesome villain. I think this guy is much more sadistic and even worse than Ramsay Bolton. He's just not as wild as Ramsay, if that makes sense. But this guy, he's evil and I love him. He a great villain. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff in season 5 that I liked, but also there's a lot of issues with season 5, such as the Dawn storyline. I thought it was pretty bad, and compared to what I heard in the books, I want to see that, you know. Sir Barristan Selmy's death was pretty underwhelming. It kind of felt like shock value for the sake of shock value, and again, pretty much deviated from the books. From what I've heard, he's still alive in the book, so again, this felt more like shock value for the sake of shock value. And although some of the action was incredible, like I said, Hardhome, I can't emphasize how epic Hardhome was. There was some of other action sequences, like the whole fight between Jaime Bronn and that one. It was pretty bad and pretty forgettable. But despite some of its issues, I still think season 5 is a solid season of Thrones. Season 2, there's a lot to love about the season. First of all, Peter Dinklage as Tyrion. The newer seasons, Tyrion's kind of moronic, but in the earlier seasons, especially in season 2, he was the smartest, he was the most intelligent, scheming. It was great to see, especially when he was trying to figure out who was a spy. We kind of get to see him participate in the Battle of Blackwater. That was awesome to see. It was truly great. And also, this season further develops the characters we saw from season 1, namely in particular both Cersei and Tyrion. Some of my favorite scenes this season was just the two of them talking. You kind of got to see a lot more underneath those characters, and it kind of made them a lot more complex and great. The dialogue this season, fantastic. It was incredible. It feels really good to talk about Game of Thrones and mention the good dialogue back then, but yeah. I also really loved seeing Theon's arc, him internally conflicted about being a Greyjoy and a Stark and going the route he did, taking over Winterfell, was kind of a bit of a tragic arc to see, especially knowing where he ends up after this season. And also, we get to see Robb Stark's rise as the king in the north. We get to see him winning victories and battles and stuff, but we see him start to make the political mistakes that he will definitely come to regret a little bit later. And of course, the Battle of Blackwater, one of the best battles still in Game of Thrones. Just such a back and forward, intense battle. The action was fantastic. It was phenomenal. It was incredible, exciting, everything. Season 2 of Game of Thrones embodies everything that I loved about this show, the complex world, characters, and when the battle was there, it means business. The season that started everything. If this season was bad, then the whole show would have suffered. But fortunately, the first season of Game of Thrones was absolutely incredible. First of all, Sean Bean as Ned Stark. Ned Stark to this day is still one of my favorite characters in Game of Thrones. He is honorable. You really get to like and root for this character. Unfortunately, because he gets decapitated in the end of episode 9. We get to see the great introduction of Westeros, this great fantasy world. The world building is fantastic. From the get-go, we know that no characters are safe from this show, especially with the ending of episode 9 when the main character, the main protagonist, Ned Stark, gets his head chopped off. A great reminder to the type of show that we're watching, at least for a while in the earlier seasons, reminding that no particular character is safe. The thing that this season does really well, it draws you into the Game of Thrones. At a point, once you kind of gathered all the information and stuff, you get in the story. You just want to see this character, which one's going to come out of the top, then scheming against the other and stuff. That was great to see. I also really liked Daenerys' arc this season. I thought that was great. Her rise in this season and the tragedy of her killing her husband, Khal Drogo, and the incredible ending with the dragon, it gives me goosebumps every single time. The dialogue, the writing, the characters, the storylines, they're all so great this season. There can only be two words to describe the sixth season of Game of Thrones, and that is freaking incredible and also satisfying. That's more than two, but oh well. This is probably the most epic season of Game of Thrones, and definitely one of the most epic seasons of television I have ever seen. It's filled with incredible payoff that has been building since the very beginning of the show. For example, Jon Snow. So Jon Snow was the man this season. We get to see him resurrect and rise as the king in the north. That was super satisfying to see. And it was great to see him and Sansa reunite. That was very heartwarming scene. The Battle of the Bastards is not only one of the best battles in Game of Thrones, I think it might actually be the best cinematic battle I have ever seen. It was insanely awesome and badass. It was incredible. I could go more detail into Battle of the Bastards, but I'm gonna get sidetracked and talk hours here. But yeah, it was incredible. Hold the Door. Bran's storyline in this season was probably my peak. Bran Solo was my favorite of his storyline. He's usually my least favorite. And season 6 was probably my favorite, especially with Hold the Door. Definitely one of the most emotional, most mind-twisting, incredible moments and twists of the show. And of course, the Winds of Winter episode. In fact, the final 2 episodes of season 6 are some of the 2 most satisfying, 2 best episodes in television history. That is payoff. It felt more satisfying than the actual finale of the show, but that's just season 8 bad writing in general. Seeing Cersei blowing up the Sept, that whole sequence was edited perfectly. Seeing Jon Snow's true lineage, Cersei being crowned as Queen, Daenerys finally going to Westeros. It was just such a great closer for the series at that point. I mean, at least for the first phase of Game of Thrones, if you know what I meant. And rewatching now is definitely bittersweet because with the ending scene of Daenerys going into Westeros on the ships, it's a reminder that this was the true last great season of Thrones before it all crumbled like a house of cards afterwards. Season 3 is masterful television. The dialogue is incredible. The writing is superb. Probably my favorite character this season, and one of my favorite characters of the whole show, was Jaime Lannister. We really get to see his redemption arc begin here. What was once this unforgivable, monstrous villain, especially in the first episode where he bangs his own sister and tries to kill a kid, and then later on he murders his cousin with his own bare hands. This guy was unforgivable until this season. We really get to see Jaime's redemption arc, see more of him as a character, more of this complex character, and that was great to see, especially that scene where he confesses about the truth of why he killed the Mad King with Brienne. That's one of the best written scenes I think I've ever seen, just in general ever. Acting incredible. I also really liked Daenerys' storyline. I think Daenerys' storyline for me was at its peak in this season. Seeing her going to city, rising the ranks, getting armies, taking over cities, being the boss, you know. Like that scene where she sacked Astapor was bad ass with a capital bad and ass. It was awesome. I really liked seeing the storyline of Jon Snow infiltrating the Wildling, especially the relationship between him and Ygritte, which was still one of my, if not the best couple in Game of Thrones. And then you have the passive political scheming and battles between the Lannisters and Tyrells, each of them trying to one up the other. That was fascinating to see, especially with Sansa's matrimony, how they both try to play each other with that whole thing. And there's a lot more depth and complex added into this world. And of course, how can I talk about this season without mentioning arguably what is, in my opinion, the greatest scene I have ever seen, television movie, The Red Wedding. Words can describe how I felt when I watched this. I had no clue this was coming. And oh my, I can't even describe it. It was tragic. It was sad. I actually cried at the end of it. It was just the chaos that we love to see in Game of Thrones, but felt earned because it has been building since the very first episode. season 8. And the best season, of course, goes to season 4. A perfect season of television, perfectly paced, perfect story, characters, just everything was incredible. First of all, Pedro Pascal as Aubrey Martell was one of my favorite characters. He just came in, showing his swagger and stuff. He was awesome. I love this character. And you could say he definitely had a mind-blowing exit. But and of course, the season starts with, at least at the end of episode 2, the Purple Wedding, where Joffrey dies, and then it sets off probably the best storyline in Game of Thrones, you know, with Joffrey's death and the fall of that, and Tyrion being framed for it while trying to figure out who killed Joffrey. I couldn't describe how drawn to, how really glued to the screen I was the entire season. Tyrion's trial is one of the greatest moments in television history, one of the best acted moments I have ever seen. It was so satisfying to see Tyrion finally stand up for himself, just tell everyone what he really thinks. Just truly breathtaking sequence. And then, which leads of course to the Mountain and the Viper, which my jaw actually dropped when I thought Aubrey Martell was finally gonna win, and then the Mountain just squeezes his eyes and crushes his skull and blows up his head like a whoopee cushion, which meant not only death for Aubrey, but also meant death for Tyrion. So the stakes were high, and I was high on the season. It was incredible. Then you have Daenerys ruling in Meereen. I love the scene where she locks away her dragons because one of them burned a child, if I remember correctly, which, you know, season 8. But yeah, I also love the storyline with Arya and the Hound. It was probably peak Arya, because after this season, her storyline goes downhill for me. But I love the chemistry between Arya and the Hound. I love the storyline. I love the scene with the Hound and the chicken. That was great. And of course, the Watchers on the Walls battle, one of the best battles in Game of Thrones. That was awesome. We finally get to see Jon Snow kicking ass. It was badass. And Samwell Tarly as well. And you got giants and mammoths, and it was so well filmed, and the battle was at night, and you could actually see a lot of it. And I feel like this season pays off the first 4 seasons of Thrones, and it felt great. Oh yeah, also the finale where Tyrion kills Shay and his dad Tywin while he's taking a dump. Truly, ironically, a great scene. I don't think I can put into words just how good season 4 of Game of Thrones is. It's one of the things you need to watch. It is a definition of perfect television.